She bought an old mansion just to resell it at a profit. But deep inside an old wardrobe, she found papers that people had once killed for. From that moment on, her life and the whole project turned into a dangerous investigation. See how it all ended? Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. The road to Los Rios wound like a pale scar through the desert, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The air shimmered with heat, and the world seemed suspended in silence, as if holding its breath. Behind the wheel of a dusty gray pickup truck sat Claire Dalton, 42 years old, with calloused hands, streaks of sun in her hair, and the kind of gaze that measured the worth of things most people would have written off long ago. She drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on a folder of documents, the deed to a property everyone had told her not to buy. Her life, once neatly drawn out in blueprints and contracts, had collapsed 2 years earlier. She and her ex-husband, Daniel, had run a modest construction company that specialized in restoring old homes in Santa Fe. Then came the divorce, the debt, and the rumors that she had mismanaged everything. Daniel walked away with clients, equipment, and reputation. She was left with a broken name and a stubborn refusal to quit. Now she was heading toward what might be her last chance, a Victorian mansion on the edge of a forgotten town. The price had been absurdly low, almost mocking. $12,000 for a house with 4 fireplaces, 2 balconies, and a history no one wanted to talk about. The real estate agent had warned her twice before signing. 3 contractors tried fixing it. 2 went bankrupt. The last one swore the house was cursed. Claire only smiled. She didn't believe in curses. She believed in rot, rust, and bad wiring. All things that could be repaired with enough time and sweat. When she reached Los Rios, the town greeted her with silence. The main street was a single stretch of cracked asphalt, lined with faded signs and shuttered shops. The air smelled of dust and dry sage. Children stared from behind fences as she passed. A man at the gas station pointed her toward the hill on the northern edge of town, where the old Fisher estate sat. "You'll see it," he said. "You can't miss it. It's the only thing still standing that shouldn't be." The driveway to the mansion was barely visible, swallowed by weeds and sand. When Claire parked and stepped out, her boots sank into the soft dirt. The house loomed above her, weather-beaten and defiant. Its roof sagged in the middle, like a spine bent under too much memory. The paint had long peeled away, revealing gray wood that glowed faintly in the sun. Half of the shutters hung loose, tapping against the walls in the wind. Yet despite the ruin, there was something about the place, a dignity, a pulse beneath the decay. Inside, the air was cool and thick with the smell of time. Dust swirled through slanted beams of light. She walked through rooms layered with silence, a grand hallway with marble stairs split by cracks, a parlor with a collapsed chandelier, and walls faintly marked by soot from an old fire. Her steps echoed, stirring faint whispers of a life long gone. She could almost hear laughter, a piano, the rhythm of footsteps above her head. In what must have been a study, she found a desk warped by heat and a single photograph framed in tarnished silver. It showed a man in a work coat, sleeves rolled up, standing beside what looked like an early water filtration unit. His eyes were sharp, his smile unassuming. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, "Walter Fisher, hydrologist, 1946. Claire turned the photo over again, studying the face. She remembered the name from the property file. He had been the original owner, an engineer rumored to have died in an accident not long after the house was built. There was little information about him, only scattered mentions of a research project he never finished. She climbed the staircase carefully, testing each step. On the second floor, at the end of a corridor lined with cracked wallpaper, She entered a large bedroom where the afternoon light poured in through a half-broken window. The first thing she noticed was the smell. Cedar and dust. Old wood that had endured both fire and time. Against one wall stood an enormous wardrobe made of dark redwood. The carvings along its doors were intricate. Vines twisting into flowers, birds mid-flight. The craftsmanship was exquisite, and though the varnish had dulled, the structure was solid. Her foreman, a young man named Miguel, followed her in. "That thing's never coming out of there," he muttered, tapping the side of the wardrobe with his boot. "Might be easier to tear down the wall than move it." Claire crouched to look at the base. The floorboards had risen slightly around it, as if the wardrobe had been here since the house was built. "Then we'll keep it," she said. "Some things belong where they are." That evening, when the workers left, she stayed behind. The sunset turned the ruined hallway gold, and the house creaked softly as it cooled. She walked through each room again, making notes, estimating costs, new beams, new roof, refinishing the floors, replacing the wiring. It would take months. She didn't have months, but she'd make it work somehow. At dusk, she sat on the front steps, watching the last light fade over the desert. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, quietly, almost to the house itself, she whispered, "You're not finished yet." Over the following days, Claire began the exhausting process of bringing the place back to life. The first task was clearing the debris. Every morning, the crew filled dumpsters with splintered furniture, shattered glass, and the remains of a life scattered by time. She worked alongside them, sleeves rolled up, hands blistered. The neighbors watched from afar, shaking their heads. No one believed the house could be saved. At night, she returned to her rented trailer near the construction site and fell asleep with aching muscles and a mind full of plans. Sometimes she dreamed of water, endless blue waves rushing through the desert, flooding the dry valleys around Los Rios. Other nights, she dreamed of a man's voice, low and calm, saying something she couldn't quite catch. When she woke, the sound lingered, like a memory that wasn't hers. 2 weeks later, the first section of the roof was replaced. The new tiles gleamed against the old wood, a patch of hope on a wounded structure. In the evenings, she liked to sit in the upstairs bedroom, the one with the wardrobe, and imagine how it might look when finished. She'd sand the floors, repaint the walls, maybe restore the carved moldings above the windows. The wardrobe, though, remained untouched. Every time she stood before it, she felt an odd pull, a mix of curiosity and reverence. One afternoon, she tried to open it. The doors resisted, the hinges groaning as if unused for decades. Inside were only dust and the faint scent of cedar. But when she leaned closer, she noticed something peculiar. The back panel seemed newer than the rest. The color of the wood was slightly different, the nails uneven. Someone, at some point, had removed and replaced it. Before she could investigate further, Miguel called her from the hall. A storm was approaching. They needed to cover the exposed beams. Claire closed the wardrobe and told herself she was imagining things. Yet that night, lying in her trailer, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning, she returned to the bedroom early, before the crew arrived. The sky outside was heavy with clouds, the air thick and restless. She knelt beside the wardrobe again, running her fingers along the edges of the backboard. There, a faint gap where the wood didn't align perfectly. She pressed against it, and it moved ever so slightly, enough to reveal the outline of something hollow behind it. A thrill ran through her. Maybe it was nothing, a mouse hole, a loose board. But her heart beat faster all the same. She imagined hidden jewelry, forgotten letters, or perhaps just another piece of history left behind. Whatever it was, the house clearly wanted her to find it. When the wind began to howl and the first drops of rain struck the roof. She closed the wardrobe and promised herself she'd return to it later. For now, there was too much to do, too much to rebuild. But as she stepped away, she could have sworn she heard a soft creak from within, as if the wood itself exhaled. By evening, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed and still. Claire stood once more in the great room, surrounded by the scent of wet dust and pine. The ceiling leaked in 2 places. The floor was slick with water, but she didn't care. The house had survived another trial, just as she had. Outside, the setting sun cast long shadows through the empty windows. Inside, a faint glimmer of light touched the wardrobe upstairs, flickering briefly against its carvings, before fading into darkness. Claire locked the door, slid the new keys into her pocket, and looked up at the house one last time before leaving for the night. "You're going to stand again," she whispered. "I'll make sure of it." The desert swallowed her footsteps as she walked back to the truck, unaware that behind the wardrobe's false panel, a corner of old paper had loosened from decades of stillness, stirring slightly in the breath of the wind that moved through the broken walls. The next chapter of her life, and the house's, was waiting there, silent and patient, in the dark. Morning came with the scent of damp wood and dust still clinging to the air after the storm. Claire parked her truck beside the half-repaired porch, stepping out into the pale light. The house loomed as always silent, wounded, but standing firm. The air was cool, a rare gift in the desert. She carried her coffee inside, feeling the echo of her boots on the old wooden floor, and something about the stillness made her pause. The house no longer felt abandoned. It was beginning to breathe again. The crew would not arrive for another hour. That gave her time. She set the coffee down on the windowsill of the upstairs bedroom, the one that had begun to feel like the center of everything. Dust drifted lazily in the air, and the wardrobe stood exactly as she'd left it. Massive, unmoving, its carved vines curling up the dark surface like frozen fire. Claire took a flat screwdriver from her tool belt and knelt at the back, tracing the uneven edge she'd noticed days before. The seam was faint, but real. She hesitated for a moment, listening to the creaks and sighs of the house. Then she wedged the screwdriver between the boards and gently pried. The wood shifted with a dry groan, releasing a faint breath of stale air. Behind the panel was a cavity, narrow but deep. Inside, wrapped in a thin layer of canvas, sat a small metal box, darkened with age. She brushed the dust off carefully. The lock had long since rusted through, and with a bit of pressure it gave way. She lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of yellowed papers, tied with twine, and an old fountain pen with initials engraved on its side WF. Her hands trembled slightly as she untied the string and unfolded the first sheet. It was a schematic drawing, lines, measurements, symbols she half recognized from her years in renovation work. Except this wasn't a blueprint of a house. It was a mechanical design, complex and elegant. At the top, written in precise handwriting, were the words, "Atmospheric water. Extraction prototype A1. She flipped through more pages, equations, material lists, temperature and humidity calculations. Then letters, handwritten notes, some addressed to a Margaret. The signature at the bottom of each, Walter Fisher. The man from the photograph downstairs. She read a fragment. If we can prove the condensation chamber works at scale, we might bring water to entire regions where none exists. But they've stopped responding to my letters. The board wants control. I cannot let them bury this. Claire sat back against the wall, heart pounding. She had expected something old love letters, perhaps, or deeds, but not this. These were scientific documents, 70 years old, And if they were genuine, they might be priceless. She read on. The final page described a shutdown. They came last night. Told me the project is no longer mine. I will not destroy it. I'll hide it here, where greed won't find it. The date was March 1947. For a long time she sat in silence, surrounded by dust and sunlight. She didn't believe in fate, but something about the moment felt chosen. She closed the box and carried it downstairs to her temporary office in the parlor. There she spread the papers across a folding table, trying to make sense of the designs. She wasn't an engineer, but she could tell they were advanced. Too advanced for their time. When the workers arrived, she hid the box under a tarp near the desk. They resumed their usual rhythm, hammering, scraping, shouting over the hum of machinery. Yet Claire's mind stayed with the papers. At lunch, she photographed every page with her phone, just in case. That evening, after the crew left, she drove to Santa Fe to meet with her friend and attorney, Robert Ames, a man who had handled her divorce and still owed her a favor. Robert examined the photos through his reading glasses, eyebrows slowly rising. "These look authentic," he said, "but they're not registered patents. If this Fisher really built a functional model and no one filed after him, these could be worth, well, a lot. Millions even." Claire shook her head. "They're almost 80 years old. Who'd care now?" He gave her a wry look. Hydro Global Energy might. They've been working on atmospheric water generation tech for the last decade. This looks similar. If you've got the original documents, you might have something they don't want anyone to see. The words unsettled her. She took the papers back, thanked him, and drove home through the darkness, her headlights cutting through the dry wind. That night, she dreamed of rain again. Only this time it didn't fall from the sky, but rose up from the sand, shimmering like glass. When she woke, the first light of dawn painted the walls gold, and for a moment, she thought she heard water trickling somewhere inside the house. 2 days later, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, courteous, and wrong. "Mrs. Dalton? My name is Charles Henley. I'm calling on behalf of Hydro Global Energy. We understand you recently purchased the Fisher property. There are certain historical documents belonging to our company that may have been left behind there. We'd be happy to compensate you for returning them." Claire's blood ran cold. "I'm sorry," she said slowly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course," the man replied, too smoothly. "Still, should you come across any materials, notes, blueprints, correspondence, please contact us. We'll make it worth your while." He hung up before she could ask how he knew her name, her number, or that she had found anything at all. That evening, she double-checked every lock on the doors and windows. The desert wind carried a low whistle through the chimney. She hid the box under the wardrobe again, this time pushing it deeper behind the wall. But the next morning, one of her workers didn't show up. Then another. Miguel, her foreman, said they were quitting. "People say the place is cursed," he muttered, avoiding her eyes. "I don't believe that, but something's not right. We keep hearing footsteps upstairs when nobody's there, and last night someone left the gate open. You should get security." Claire brushed it off, though unease coiled inside her. That afternoon, she found tire tracks near the back fence, fresh ones. She told herself they must have belonged to the crew, though they didn't park there. She called the police station in town, but the officer who answered sounded half asleep and uninterested. "If nobody broke in, there's nothing we can do," he said. The following night, unable to sleep, she returned to the bedroom with the wardrobe. She sat on the floor with a flashlight, rereading Fisher's letters. One line in particular caught her attention. "If these calculations are correct, the desert itself holds enough moisture to sustain life, if only we learn to listen to it." The simplicity of that belief moved her. It was the same stubborn hope she felt when she looked at this broken house, that even what seems dead can be reborn. Outside, something scraped against the porch. Claire froze, light flickering across the floorboards. Then silence. She waited several minutes before daring to peek through the curtain. Nothing but the moonlit yard and the swaying shadows of dry grass. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. The next morning, she took the box into town and made digital scans of every document at the local library. As she left, she noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Its tinted windows reflected the glare of the sun. It didn't move as she drove away. But when she looked in her rearview mirror 5 minutes later, the vehicle was behind her at a distance. It followed until she turned off onto the dirt road leading to the property, then vanished. She laughed bitterly when she reached the house. "Paranoid," she muttered. "You're just tired." Yet as she unloaded her tools, she couldn't shake the certainty that someone had been inside while she was gone. A few nails she'd left on the windowsill were gone. The tarp in the parlor had been shifted slightly. The air felt different, disturbed. That night, she called Robert again. "I think someone's watching me," she said. "Get out of there for a while," he urged. "Stay in town. Whatever those papers are, they've drawn attention. I can contact a reporter. I know, someone who deals with corporate whistleblower cases." But Claire refused to leave. She had put every dollar she had into this project. She wouldn't abandon it. The house had become more than a job. It was the last thread connecting her to the version of herself that believed in creation instead of collapse. Days passed with a tense rhythm. The repairs continued slowly. She replaced broken glass, rewired the hallway lights, painted the lower rooms. The structure was beginning to hold again. At sunset, the house glowed with the faint promise of beauty. Yet every sound after dark kept her awake. Once, she found footprints near the back door. Another time, the generator cable had been cut clean through. Miguel quit the next morning without explanation. Claire stood alone in the empty yard as the truck carrying the last of the workers disappeared down the road. The wind rustled through the dry trees. The silence was complete. For the first time, she wondered whether the rumors about the Fisher house might have been less about ghosts and more about secrets. That night, she sat at her folding table with the lamp burning low and studied Fisher's final letter again. It ended with words that made her skin prickle. "If someone finds this, it means they've come again. Tell them no. Protect the design. It was never meant for them." As if on cue, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You can still do the right thing. Sell the property before it's too late." Her pulse quickened. She turned off the light and moved to the window. Outside, beyond the rusted gate, 2 headlights glowed briefly before disappearing into the darkness. The next morning, she drove into town to buy new locks and cameras. On her way back, she stopped by the small diner near the highway. The waitress, an older woman with gray curls, noticed the exhaustion in her face. "You working up at the Fisher place?" she asked softly. When Claire nodded, the woman lowered her voice. "You be careful, honey. That house ain't just old. People have been nosing around there for years. Men in suits, city types. Always asking about blueprints, patents, some invention nobody ever saw. The last man who tried to restore it found his tools stolen and his truck burned. Said he was being followed. Left in the middle of the night." Claire's throat went dry. "Did he say who they were?" The woman shook her head. "Didn't have to. Sometimes you just know when something's too big for you." Back at the house, Claire stood at the top of the stairs, gazing at the wardrobe. The light from the window fell across its surface like a pale hand. She thought of Fisher, of the letters, of the quiet faith running through his words. Maybe he, too, had felt the same pull to protect something worth more than his own comfort. By evening, she had hidden copies of all the documents in several places around the property. The attic, the floorboards beneath the parlor, the hollow of the wardrobe itself. Then she sat in the dim bedroom, writing in her own notebook. She documented every strange call, every car, every footprint. If anyone came for her, there would be a record. As the night deepened, the desert grew utterly still. Somewhere, an owl called. Claire leaned her head against the wall and listened to the faint groan of wood as the house settled around her. It felt less like a structure now, and more like a presence, something aware, quietly enduring. She no longer doubted that Fisher's secret had been buried deliberately, that his disappearance was not an accident. And now, by sheer stubborn chance, it had landed in her hands. When dawn came, she stood outside on the porch, watching the light spread over the horizon. The house cast a long shadow down the hill, but its windows gleamed with the first touch of gold. She felt both fear and resolve tighten in her chest. She would not let anyone take what she had found. Behind her, upstairs, the wardrobe waited in silence, hiding the truth of a man's dream and the danger that was beginning to stir again after 70 years of sleep. The night after the headlights vanished down the dirt road, Claire did not sleep. The house was too quiet. Every creak of timber, every sigh of the desert wind against the window sounded like an intruder's step. She sat in the dark with a flashlight beside her. Fisher's letters spread across the floor, and tried to decide what frightened her more. The idea that someone might come for them, or that no one would, and she would be left entirely alone with the burden of knowing what they contained. The desert outside lay drowned in silver moonlight, endless and empty. For the first time, she wondered if the house itself might have been waiting all these years for someone desperate enough to stay when everyone else had fled. At dawn, she stepped outside and found a black car parked by the gate. No one was inside. The hood was cold, the tires marked with dust, as if it had been there for hours. Her pulse quickened. She circled the property, searching for footprints, for any sign of entry. But the only tracks belonged to her and the crew who had abandoned her days ago. She went back inside, locked the door, and pressed her back to it, breathing shallowly. It was then she understood that fear would not leave her until she did something with what she had found. By noon, she had packed the documents into plastic sleeves and sealed them in a waterproof bag. She hid one copy in the hollow beneath the wardrobe floorboards, and another beneath a loose brick in the fireplace downstairs. Then she placed the originals in her truck, intending to drive them into town and deliver them to Robert's contact, the journalist who, he said, dealt with corporate scandals. Yet when she turned the key in the ignition, the engine coughed once and died. She tried again. Nothing. Lifting the hood, she saw the fuel line had been cleanly severed. Someone had been here. She called the police again, voice trembling, but the dispatcher only promised to send a car when available. Hours passed, and no one came. The sun dipped low over the desert, turning the sky the color of rust. Claire sat on the porch with a wrench in one hand, eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for a shape to move in the distance. When none did, she returned inside and bolted every door. That night, as she sat in the half-lit bedroom, her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. The message read, "We warned you. Last chance to sell before we take what's ours." She turned the phone off, her hand shaking, and slipped it into a drawer. The room seemed to close in around her, heavy with silence. The wardrobe loomed in the corner, its dark surface absorbing the lamplight. It was strange how it no longer frightened her. Instead, it felt almost protective, like a witness that had seen worse. She thought of Fisher, how he must have sat here once, writing his final letters, hearing footsteps outside, knowing they were coming for him. And she whispered, as if to him, "I won't run either." The next morning, she woke to the smell of smoke. Panic surged through her as she ran downstairs. The small storage shed behind the house, where she kept leftover paint and insulation, was ablaze. Flames climbed high, devouring the dry wood in seconds. She grabbed a hose, spraying until her arms burned, but the water sputtered weakly from the cracked pipe. By the time the fire department from town arrived, the shed was a black skeleton. The official report later claimed it was electrical malfunction, but she knew better. Inside that shed had been one of the few intact boxes of Fisher's documents she hadn't yet copied. When Robert called that evening, she told him everything: the car, the fire, the messages. His voice hardened. "This isn't just property dispute, Claire. You're sitting on something valuable enough for them to destroy you over it. You need to make it public before they silence you." "How?" she asked quietly. "I can't even get to town. They've cut me off. Then I'll come to you. Tomorrow morning. Send me the coordinates." She hesitated before agreeing. She had begun to distrust the world beyond the house, to feel that only its crumbling walls were real. But she sent the location. Then, for the first time in weeks, she let herself cry, not from fear, but exhaustion. The tears came silently as she sat in the parlor, staring at the flickering shadows cast by the lamp. Through the cracked window, she could hear the faint hum of crickets, the breath of the desert moving like a tide. The next day, Robert never arrived. His phone went straight to voicemail. The journalist he had mentioned emailed her instead. "Mr. Ames told me about the documents. If you can scan and send them, we can start publishing immediately. The world deserves to know." Claire hesitated only a moment before replying. "I'll get them to you tonight." She worked for hours, carefully scanning every remaining sheet on the old printer she'd borrowed from the hardware store. The process was painfully slow, the machine wheezing after each page, but she persisted until her eyes blurred. When she was done, she sent the files to the journalist and uploaded copies to an online drive under an alias. As the final document transferred, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness. The generator outside had stopped. She reached for the flashlight, her breath shallow. From the front yard came the faint crunch of gravel beneath boots. Then another sound, a quiet metallic click, like a door handle turning. Claire's pulse thundered. She crouched by the staircase, listening. Whoever was outside moved slowly, confidently, as though they knew the house better than she did. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then came the roar of an engine and the sweep of headlights across the wall. A truck. The intruders must have fled, startled by the approach of another vehicle. She ran to the window and saw a familiar figure stepping out. Miguel. Relief nearly brought her to her knees. He looked up at her and called, "You all right? I saw the power go out from the highway." They spent the next hour restoring the generator. He explained that after quitting, he'd felt guilty and came back to help finish the roof. She didn't tell him about the documents. Some things were safer unspoken. Still, she was grateful for the company. When he left later that night, promising to return with supplies in the morning, the house felt less haunted. For a moment, she almost believed everything would be all right. But at dawn, Miguel's truck was still parked by the gate, engine cold, doors wide open. His tools lay scattered in the dirt. He was gone. No footprints led away, only the tire marks of another vehicle. Claire called his name until her voice broke, but the desert answered only with silence. Something inside her changed that day. Fear gave way to fury. She would not be intimidated into silence. She printed the letters she'd scanned and drove the repaired truck into town, refusing to look back. The journalist met her in the diner, a thin man with restless eyes. He skimmed through the documents and looked up in disbelief. "This is real," he whispered. "If half of this checks out, Hydroglobal's entire water division is built on stolen work. Then publish it, she said. Make them own what they buried. He nodded, promising to start immediately. She left him there, too drained to care whether she'd just signed her own death warrant. As she drove home, the desert wind rose again, swirling sand across the road. A storm was brewing on the horizon, thunder without rain, the kind that tore through everything dry and hollow. By the time she reached the property, the sky had turned an angry gray. Lightning flashed over the hills, illuminating the house in bursts. Inside, she bolted the doors, lit a lantern, and sat beside the wardrobe. She felt its solid weight behind her, the faint scent of cedar mixed with smoke. "It's done," she murmured. "They can't hide it anymore." The storm broke soon after midnight. The wind howled through the cracks, rain slashed against the glass, and thunder shook the walls. Claire walked from room to room, checking for leaks, but each flash of lightning showed something different. Figures outside the windows, fleeting and indistinct. She told herself it was shadows, tricks of the storm. Yet when she passed the parlor, the front door shuddered under a heavy blow. Another, harder. Someone was out there. She grabbed the wrench from her workbench and stood in the hall, heart hammering. A voice called through the windmail, urgent. "Mrs. Dalton, open up! This is the Los Rios police!" Relief flooded her, but doubt followed fast. The officer she'd spoken to before had never come. Why now? She approached slowly, peering through the peephole. Two men stood on the porch, soaked but composed, their uniforms unmarked by mud. Something about them didn't fit. The taller one smiled faintly when he saw movement behind the glass. "Everything's fine," she called. "Come back in the morning." "Ma'am," the man said, louder now. "We just want to make sure you're safe. Open the door, please." Claire stepped back. "If you're real police, show me your badges." The man's smile faded. He glanced at his partner. A second later, the door rattled violently as one of them kicked it. She stumbled backward, dropping the wrench. The next blow cracked the frame. Thinking fast, she ran upstairs, grabbed the box of remaining papers, and pushed open the window onto the balcony. The rain hit her face like needles. Below, the desert gleamed black and slick. She climbed over the railing, dropping the box into the thick grass below, and lowered herself down. The men burst into the room just as she slipped into the shadows. She heard them shouting, boots pounding across the floor. But she kept running through the rain, past the twisted trees, down toward the old storage ruins where the ground dipped. Lightning struck close by, lighting up the hill and the house above it, the windows blazing with light, as if the whole place were alive again. She hid until dawn. When she returned, the men were gone. The door hung from its hinges, the rooms ransacked. Yet nothing of Fisher's work remained inside. They had taken what they came for, or thought they had. Because the wardrobe, untouched in its corner, still hid the copies beneath its false floor, and the files she'd sent to the journalist were already spreading across the world. Days later, the headlines appeared. Leaked documents expose water giant's hidden past. Investigations began. Arrests followed. Fisher's name resurfaced after 70 years, his legacy restored. When the reporters came to the property asking for comment, Claire refused to speak. She had said enough. Instead, she continued the restoration, repairing the damage left by the break-in. The house, though battered, still stood. Its scars were visible but honest. Months passed. The desert turned green for the first time in decades, a rare season of rain. The restoration finished at last. Claire kept her promise. She didn't sell. Instead, she transformed the property into the Walter Fisher Center for Sustainable Water Research. Students and scientists visited from across the country, studying the same principles that had once been hidden inside the wardrobe. On the morning of the dedication ceremony, she stood alone in the upstairs bedroom. The walls gleamed pale gold, the floors newly polished. The wardrobe remained where it had always been, cleaned and restored, but never replaced. She placed Fisher's framed photograph on the top shelf, beside a plaque engraved with his words. If someone finds this, it means the truth still has a home. Outside, voices called her name, asking her to come down. But for a moment she stayed there, listening to the faint creak of the house as the wind moved through it. It sounded like breathing, like gratitude. She smiled. "You were right," she whispered to the man whose dream had outlived him. The truth found its home. And when she finally stepped outside, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting the old house so brightly it seemed reborn, a monument not to ruin, but to resilience. The house that no one had wanted had chosen her, and she had chosen it back. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss what comes next. Check out the other stories on the channel, and share this video with someone who loves a good mystery.